Hello, this is Blair Stanislao with the Happy Lyon Center. Welcome to our podcast, Mystical and Infamous, where we have playful and easy conversations about anything mystical, getting to the heart of all things strange and weird. Join us in a bit of magical tomfoolery, spreading the alchemy of love and light. And now, we invite you to enjoy the show. Where we see the struggles in the chart, then when you can start to kind of see that that's there and it's not something you did or that you're bad or wrong for or anything like that, that you can start to see that for me, at least, it was also a way of kind of opening up to, okay, this is my trauma, or these are my struggles. And if I have this in my chart and it proves true, that means that everybody else has it in their chart. And they can kind of use that and to get a better understanding of really what does that mean in their life? Like, where are the struggles that maybe they're not consciously identifying? Then when you bring it to your awareness, because you see it in the chart, then what do you do with it? Because there's guidance in astrology too, right?
Yes. Like a map that a navigator uses to plot a course, to know where the axis or axes of conflict are so that they can align themselves with an axis of harmony. Because in reality, energy never gets stuck, pure energy.
Yeah.
And what appears to be stuck is us allowing that energy not to flow through us. So what is it, as Dr. Hugh Lin says, who developed the Ho'oponopono, self-identity through Ho'oponopono, what is going on in me that I'm experiencing this feeling or perception of stuckness? So self-responsibility, what's the part of me that is responsible for this feeling of being stuck? And it doesn't mean that being stuck is a bad thing. See, we live in a world today where we have so many modalities to get out of the feelings of crisis, to get out of the feelings of facing an axis of squares or oppositions in our horoscope, which seem to be going against the flow or the current of our lives. When in reality, it's an opportunity to be initiated into the next step in our development. And there's a famous astrologer, the late astrologer, Noel Till, who spoke about how tension in our muscles creates activities, creates stuff that allows you to accomplish something. So, for example, we have biceps and we have triceps. So the desire to flex is balanced by the desire to extend. So without tension, nothing gets accomplished. And there was a great writer named Helena Roerich, she was a mystic writer from Russia, and she spoke about in her Letters of Helena Roerich how nothing happens without tension, and tension is our friend, not our enemy. So in regards to the woman you were talking about and how she's helping people to resolve crises, I envision someone like her walking through a neighborhood or a community, and just by her presence, assuming that there is a flow moving through her, a cosmic flow, where there is nothing stuck except people's perceptions of themselves being stuck, and how she's moving through the neighborhood and people are automatically beginning to repolarize into an unstuckness. The stuckness is unhappening. It's not happening. So we can be a benefit to people, our immediate families. We can be a benefit to those in our neighborhood, to those in our communities, to those in our cities, and to those in our states by allowing the cosmic light substance, if you will, to flow through us unimpeded, knowing that as we grace the flow of life with our own love, we can, in a sense, be helping our planet to stay in balance. and to repolarize energies out of balance. So I think what you were describing in terms of the woman and what she's doing is a beautiful thing. We can all do that. We all have the ability to be like electrodes in the earth, where cosmic energy can flow through us and have uh, a salutary effect in our lives and the lives of those who come in contact with our auras. So we're always emanating, we're always radiating, just like the stars. And the luminaries, the rays of the luminaries heal. The rays of the luminaries protect like a shield. The rays of the luminaries create perfection, balanced action. So all things are possible. And in astrology, it's the same thing. Astrology is just a word. And the idea of astrology is that you can measure something, you can find out stuff by measuring where the planets are in your horoscope. And that's a good thing. It allows you to get a sense of your connectedness to the all that is. And that connectedness allows us to begin to co-measure ourselves with a reality, with a higher reality that allows us to not necessarily grow or expand, because the idea of growth is the idea of time. And if we go beyond that, realizing that the future, the past, and the present are always here now, the idea of expanding through our stuckness and moving through all of that stuff into a field of energetic coherence, which allows us to be a perfect window through which the sun of our life can pour through and irradiate an entire neighborhood with the radiation of love and balance and coherence is a cool thing. And of course, in this day and time, the woman you were talking about, crisis is not an intermittent thing. It's a continuous thing. Mm-hmm. And points of crisis are what is actually allowing us to rise higher into our higher selves and to have a conscious resonance with our higher self, where we are becoming more aware and more in tune with with our being, which is much greater than what we think it is in terms of the limitations of our bodies, in terms of their appearance. So we are much more than we think we are, and we know this. The thing is, for some people, is just that information is where people tend to stop and not do anything and work and labor to continually evolve those things, where every moment of every day you are conscious of yourself as an open door through which the naturally balanced energies of the universal can continually pour through you like an artesian well, and be a blessing to those, even if you don't know that the person standing next to you is going through a traumatic experience. You're bringing a tremor of light, a tremor of love, a tremor of sacred fire into that person's life. And you may have just passed by that person for a few seconds. That person now, in terms of what they've been going through, there's an amelioration of that person's problem. And they don't know why necessarily. What just happened to me? I feel so happy. I feel so glad. I feel joy, which I've never felt before in so long. So we're not always aware of what's going on on the inner side of life. Or let me rephrase that, because we can always upgrade our language. We can be more aware of how our presence has a beautiful influence on others.
So I just had this week, I had a client come in, and I love all that you just said, because it really not only did it resonate with me, but it really applies to that particular person's experience with hypnosis. So he came in for hypnosis, and he has a pull to do this personal growth that you were referring to. Okay. And he's had, of course, lots of struggles, as you just said. The more struggles you have, the easier it is for you to kind of get into that personal growth, because you're in crisis, right? You're having to find a way to get out of that. And he messaged me and said that, basically he thought he didn't receive it well. And it's just so the way he described it, I don't remember exactly what it was, but essentially he's very sensitive to energies and maybe has not been provided an opportunity to acknowledge that kind of thing. So, but because he's sensitive, he's noticing this huge shift. Like, he can tell if, like you're saying, we think the energy's stuck, but it's something that we're either thinking or feeling or doing that's stop.
Yes.
It's not necessarily stopping the flow, but it feels like a congestion of sorts, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and it's really interesting to hear you say all that, because a lot of times there's this phrase that says, basically follow your bliss, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
a lot of typical thinking, I would say definitely Westerners, will kind of downplay that because, maybe they need or want struggle, or, it's not whatever goal has been presented to them that they assumed is theirs now. But there's a lot of truth in that, because what you're describing to me sounds like following your bliss, getting in harmony with your energy. So that's acknowledging what's going on within you so that you can then make an adjustment to allow the energy to flow. And again, it's just the way what I'm hearing you say is you make an adjustment within your energy field, which is all inner work, can involve outside, but it doesn't always, right? Make an adjustment in your energy so that your energy flows better, so that then you can have a positive impact on other people, which is the same thing as follow your bliss. Follow your bliss. You find happiness, the energy flows, things go well, because I think that's a natural state. If things are flowing for you, it feels good. And we tend to associate that with joy. And then that radiates out to other people and they can experience that. And I'm just going to share this one story that this is a description of his sensitivities. He was in a store, a well-known, huge store. Everything was good. He noticed some people, he said hi or whatever, but he and his girlfriend were going through the checkout line. And all of a sudden he experienced this energetic feeling of, the way he would describe it is ick, like yuck. He just didn't like it. Basically, it didn't resonate with him, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that he knows this, but he's clairaudient. So he heard some words that somebody, ultimately what it wound up being was it was somebody else in the space where he was checking out, said some words that were really negative towards other people, like really horribly mean, right? And angry. And so he sensed this, but he's so in his own world, probably for protection, that he didn't notice any of this. He just knew he didn't like that feeling and he wanted to get out of there. So they hurried up with their things that they were buying, and the girlfriend was there and she was kind of observing what was going on, and they go out and he just wants to like get out of that whole space. And they get in the car, and through the conversation she says, oh, it was this person, I know who it was, and this is the way they were acting and this is what they were doing. So she didn't necessarily hear what the man heard, because he's so sensitive, right? He didn't even notice what was around him. He didn't visually look at anything. But she immediately knew, as soon as he told her, this is what I'm feeling. Oh, it's this person. And that's what it was. And I was trying to explain to him, like, that's you're first off, you're clairaudient. You heard him say it. You do have to be aware. You need to be aware of noticing what's your energy and what's somebody else's energy. But the opposite can occur, right? Somebody's in a beautiful space. They feel wonderful. They're thinking positive thoughts. That can also kind of go out, even if they're not saying it. It goes out in the energy field, and then the other people receive that. So that's sort of what you're
Yeah.
describing, right?
We know when we come in contact with someone if they're just full of BS, right? Now, BS doesn't have to mean what it's normally colloquially meant to mean. It could mean BS could mean belief systems, right?
Right.
Stuff that we believe and accept, and because we accept and believe it, then it's true for us. It may not be true for another person. And so what you are talking about is interesting in the sense that the whole universe, the whole cosmic expanse can be contained in the call of the heart. When we think of the universe, when we think of a solar system, galaxies, multiverse, we may think of distance or this immensity, and yet we are, if we accept what quantum physics has told us, and that word is becoming more and more inept in terms of its meaning because it's used so much now. Let's get behind what the word quantum physics represents. It represents the field of possibilities, endless, unlimited possibilities. As we recognize ourselves as one with whole, the whole of all things, one with the infinite, one with infinity, then we know that whatever we think, whatever we feel, whatever we say is simultaneously everywhere at the same time. Responsibility for our thoughts and our feelings is probably the most important concept to entertain and to become. Because when we take responsibility for our own energies pouring through us, we are having a salutary effect on everything. And everything is uplifted at that moment as we begin to catch a negative thought, a so-called negative thought, and change it before we finish the sentence into something that is positive, uplifting, something that will be useful to another person. The same thing with our feelings. Our feelings are our powerhouse. And whatever we're feeling at this present moment becomes the dominant force in our world. And it creates, our feelings are much more tangible than our thoughts are. Yet our thoughts move our feelings. Every thought we think has an effect on our feeling world and our astral body. So as we begin to recognize how powerful our feelings are and how they are responsible in terms of how we regulate them for all the problems, limitations, resistances, and pressures and sufferings that we experience, we will be empowered to govern our feeling world and to watch our feeling world and allow only feelings which are helpful, useful, which are constructive to pour through us. This is something that hasn't been really spoken about. Usually it's thought that is considered the most important. It is. And yet our feelings, we can let feelings of viciousness and maliciousness go forth in our feeling world all day and all night. We can have arguments with people that we don't like in our consciousness, and we can have those feelings of spite. And we don't always understand that we're sending that out into the universe, and it has a return current.
Yeah.
Everything has a return current. So eventually we receive the boomerang of the effect of our intense energy of hatred or irritation that we have just sent out, because we feel that maliciousness before we send it out. It's got to pass through us first. So where is the suffering? Where is the problem? It's the problem comes as we have those feelings. We are experiencing our own suffering as we send out suffering to others before it reaches the other person. So it's quite interesting that many times people, as the saying goes, shoot themselves in the foot every time there is a negative feeling of criticism or condemnation against another person. So as we are aware of this one incontrovertible fact, flowing through us every single moment is the action of life. And the action of life is naturally harmonious, loving, abundant, peaceful, beautiful. Before it comes in contact with our consciousness, it contains those qualities. It's perfect. We put a patina over it as it passes through our thoughts and our feeling worlds and our words. And then it becomes something different. Then it becomes imprisoned in that matrix we just created in our own minds, in our own feeling world. So we have to be responsible for everything that happens in our worlds. It is our responsibility to harmonize our world. What another person does is not our concern. What we do with ourselves by taking responsibility is one of the highest forms of love and selflessness. Because when we blame persons, places, and conditions for our problems, we don't always understand that we are actually empowering those outer appearances with those qualities, because the appearance world is just an appearance world. What we perceive is what we perceive because the movie in our mind is perceiving it. And so when we recognize that we can see differently, we can imagine differently every moment of every day, we now have the scepter of dominion that we can use to walk the earth as gods and goddesses, because we're using God energy all the time. We're using the energy of presence all the time. So
What do
word
you,
so is a beautiful word because it means and what now?
yeah,
And what now is anything is possible. In the blink of an eye, things can change. Things do change. From
mhm.
what to what? Well, that depends on what we desire to change into. And when we're clear on what we desire to change into in the moment, then our subconscious mind says, okay, I can go with that because I understand what you're saying. But when we say I just want to change, that could be anything. Subconscious mind says, what? But when we say I desire to change my perspective from one of accepting appearances as they present themselves to actually imagining what I would desire to see in my world, which would be of benefit to the world, then we are taking more responsibility about setting our intentions and all that. We're always intending something. And most of the time, our intentions are just memories we play in our subconscious that we are not always aware of. So we think many times that we are intending to do something when in reality, it's the habit of certain memories that we think we're intending, but many times it's just a memory. And I'm just kind of paraphrasing what Dr. Hugh Lin speaks about in Ho'oponopono. He's the man who you may have heard worked at Hawaii State Hospital. And there were people there who were there for murder, rape, all kinds of malicious acts. And most of them were in chains. Most of them could not walk unattended throughout the prison. And he was asked to come and use his methodology to see what can happen to these inmates. So he said, well, let me have the names of the people. And he was told, well, that's classified information. We can't give you their names. He said, okay, well, um, just give me some time and maybe a year or two, I'll get there. He was a psychiatrist. So he finally got to the Hawaii State Hospital and he saw the name. He saw a list of the names of the people and he just looked at each name and he felt something from each name. So he said, well, what is going on in me that this person is here because he did this and that? So as he began to clean himself, as he began to purify the feelings that were passing through him as he was reading this list, after several months, people started to become whole. And after a few years, practically, virtually, everybody in that prison had changed. And eventually the prison had to close down because these inmates had changed. They were different. They were no longer in that state of where they would be a menace to society. He did that by working on himself. So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how we influence everything and how the whole cosmic expanse is contained in every call of our heart. Everything that goes within our own heart goes out in a sense, but really doesn't go out. It's already there. Our heart flame, for example, is already everywhere now in the solid state. It doesn't go from one point to another. We are already where we are, every single place that we can think of in this universe. So the whole idea of time and space is really dissolved in the field of our heart. and there's a saying, there's a great song that life is not a struggle, it's a journey of love. So with all the things that, for example, I've studied in my life, studied many things, many concepts that, may seem to be somewhat arcane to others, it's all resolved into this love.
I think that might be the ultimate. I mean,
Yeah.
it's any path. It's kind of like we've actually talked on this podcast, but I've had many conversations about this. But and only because it's controversial in a way. Okay, different religions or different beliefs. If you look at the essence of what they are, they're all going towards the same thing. They all describe the same thing. They have a path. Yes, they have a way of doing it. They have they have traditions, they have, formalities of what they do or they don't do, but ultimately they're all kind of looking for that same thing. And it's a spiritual connection you're talking about, right? So it's just many different paths all up to the same place, which is ultimately love, right?
Yes. Recognizing our spiritual connection as already existing, is already what it is a useful step towards greater awareness. We do not have to come to that state. We are already that state. So as we wake up more and more each day to our already connected or feeling connection with the all in all, then we find we can shorten the distance, you might say, between these so-called 2 points. So they say the shorter distance between 2 points is a straight line. And when the 2 points are united, there is a field between those points. And within that field is the resolution of duality into union, oneness. So going back to what I was saying earlier about our thoughts and our feelings going out, whenever a thought and our feeling seems to go out, okay, it's already there at that moment, there is a return current. And the return current is commensurate with the quality of that thought and the quality of that feeling. So in this case, people talk about the law of attraction. Well, it's become also kind of patent formulaic these days because we use it all the time. And what are we attracting? People speak about the law of attraction. And we've already attracted what we're seeing. So whatever's going on in our world, we've attracted that. So we're always manifesting, we're always in a state of attraction. So again, the responsibility is how to develop a concept, a heart set, a mindset where we recognize the action of life pouring through us and how we are being charged by every single thought and every single feeling pouring through us. Just like we pay our utility bills, we're charged by the amount of energy we're using. Whether in the wintertime we're turning on our heat, we are charged for that. And we are also charged for everything that's going on in our world. And the charging, we speak about karma, and yet the karma is not punitive. It is just a just result of our experiments in creation. So as we experiment, as we create continually, many times the experiments fail. They seem to fail. And so now we have to upgrade into better experiments. So there's no condemnation or criticism by the all in all, or by what some people call God, or your presence. There is only the patience and the allowance for us to make these so-called mistakes, errors, and come up higher. So we should never beat ourselves over the head when we've done something that we know we shouldn't have done. The whole idea of regret and remorse is nothing compared to a radical reorganization of our consciousness. And as we organize our consciousness to be the receptor and the giver of all that is useful, all that is helpful to people, then we've realized who we are. Again, gods and goddesses, the manifestation. And I say the word God because we associate God with divinity. And God is in everything, in every form. Every point of space is made up of atoms, and these atoms are made up of electrons, right? So everywhere we move, we're moving through fields of electrons. If you ever look at the sky when it's blue, right, and the sun is out, but you're not looking directly at it, at noontime, you can see these little dancing points of light. Have you ever noticed that?
Yes.
Those dancing points of light, that is the electronic nature of the one. It is sometimes called the body of God. And this body of God is made up of these particles and waves of pure light energy. And everything that you see around you, I mean, I'm looking at your wall, I'm looking at certain plaques and certificates and things of that nature. I think they're certificates of accomplishment. The door, the clothes you're wearing, all of that is made up of the light of the one. And so we are sitting on light, moving at a certain rate of vibration, which allows it to be a chair. Or we have our laptops on our tables. All of these things are made of light. And when we recognize that everything is made of light, and light responds to our feelings and our thoughts immediately, we know now that when we think a thought, the light energies around us that are swirling in us in a non-determined manner take on and become that thing that we are thinking, and eventually reaches the realms of the three-dimensional world and becomes that thing that, oh my God, what happened here? The thing we don't like. So again, every single moment we are taking this swirling, beautiful light particles and light waves of the one, and we are creating something. So what are we creating at this moment? There's a saying in well, I used to, and I still do, practice and conduct classes in Tai Chi. And one of my Tai Chi brothers back on the East Coast used to always say, "Where am I?" And the answer is here. What time is it? Now. So if we ask ourselves those questions, what time is it? Now. Where are we? Here. Where am I? Here. What time is it? Now. It allows us to come back into our present awareness of this moment. And there is nothing wrong with this moment, not a thing, until we take a perception and we attach it to our awareness at that moment. And then that moment becomes, oh, I got problems. So again, everything, I think the way our conversation has been going is this self-responsibility. And going back to Dr. Hugh Lin, the responsibility that he took, there was a book out called Zero Limits, written by Joe Vitale and Dr. Hugh Lin. And he describes in Ho'oponopono how this self-responsibility is really important, because we don't always know what's going on. We think, oh, this is the problem, but many times we don't know. We only see the surface of what is really happening. And he says that there's billions and trillions of engrams of information and data that we are not even aware of. You remember the Matrix, right? In the Matrix, how you saw these different symbols coming down at different parts of the movie. In a sense, that's what's going on all the time. These strings of information, and we are not always outwardly aware. We can be of what they mean. So by actually going through a process of self-responsibility and doing this cleansing of ourselves, this purification of ourselves, and he uses these 4 words: I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. And he said that by doing this, whatever we don't know is going on, we in a sense are taking responsibility for the next moment, because those particles, those waves of information, that data that is coming through us can be healed, can be resolved and dissolved as we give those words silently in our consciousness. So that is how Dr. Hugh Lin helped to, or by working on himself, somehow it connected with all the people in that Hawaii State Hospital, and they were able to just get up and go, except for maybe one person, I think, who hadn't left, but had to be transferred someplace else. So it's interesting. Astrology had led me to a lot of these things. I was working at IBM back in the 70s, and I met, two of my friends, very close friends, who were studying Hebrew and comparative religion together, and they had learned how to calculate horoscopes. So I was there working at IBM, and I used to go to these other buildings. When I went for lunch, I would go to see my friend, and he would teach me how to calculate horoscopes. And then another friend of mine who worked at IBM, he would give me other information about the mathematics of calculating a horoscope. So to shorten this little documentary, I was able to work at a advertising firm maybe about a year later. And this woman walks up, and she asked me, when is my baby going to be born? And at that time, a few people knew that I was into astrology. And at that time, I was into it. And so I was just getting into it. And so I took the moment she asked the question, and I did a chart on it. And about a few days later, I came back and I told her, your baby is going to be a boy. He's going to be born on this day. And this is based on the formulas of horary astrology, which is doing a chart for the moment a question is asked or the moment of an inquiry. And then I left the firm. And after about maybe 6-7 months, she calls me. And I didn't remember that I spoke to this woman. And she says, my baby was born on the exact day you said it was going to be born, and it's a boy. And I told her that according to the horoscope, the baby was going to be born at a certain date. And she told me her pediatrician said the baby was going to be born 2 weeks earlier than the date I gave her. Okay. So I said, well, according to the horoscope, there are no complications that I see in the horoscope. And so I left it at that. So, well, she was born, the baby was born, he was born 2 weeks after the pediatrician said the baby was going to be born. Was that a result of her thinking that what I was saying was correct and what the doctor was? Well, who knows? We don't know. Yeah, it was very interesting how that all turned out. So that was one of those things that got me to a point where I recognized, well, I shall not just be into astrology. I'm going to begin to use this as a portal. And this became, over an evolution of decades, a point where I realize now that just the study of astrology allowed me to be in contact with a higher level of consciousness. And so it was a portal that just led me to another place. It was a means, it was a pointer. It's not the thing itself. Yeah. And it's so easy to get caught up in calculations and whether this house system is correct or whether one system works better than another. These are okay. Yet when some people into astrology just get into finding out how to do more calculations, then the point I think is missed that astrology is a pointer. It points you to the stars. And what are the stars? The stars are portals, conduits, levels of consciousness whereby the light of the infinite pours throughout the whole of space and all that is therein. So when we walk in the street, when we go to a coffee shop, we are moving through currents and countercurrents of energies that are continually pouring in through the whole field of space. And so we can't chart every single moment using astrology, right? Yet we can be aware that astrology is happening all the time. And by being responsible for what goes on in our world, we can allow those beautiful currents to pour through us and have a useful effect on the people that are near us. There was another time I was walking in another town. I was in New York, New Rochelle, New York, and I was walking north. And I saw this woman who I used to see when I went and ate at McDonald's. Yeah, I had McDonald's. I was a vegetarian for a while back in the 80s and 90s, but I still had McDonald's. I kept a balance, a psychological elbow room when it came to my eating habits. Anyway, she asked me, "Can you speak to a friend of mine? She has a problem and she wants to talk to you about it because I told her you were into astrology." So I spoke to this woman. I introduced myself. She introduced herself. She says, "Where's my brother?" So I took the moment she asked the question, and I said, "I'll get back to you." And I did the horoscope, and I saw that her brother was about 10 miles southeast of the place where his sister asked the question, and that he may have been in a hospital, may have had some problems with his heart. And this is horary astrology, and that she'll see him in about 30 days. So I go back after I told her that. I go back and I do my work. I was selling shoes at the time at Adler's Shoe Shop. I had to walk my walk. I had to walk my talk, right? So I was working at Adler's Shoe Shop for a while, and eventually, my client came back to me. And she said, "I found my brother. We were estranged for about 30 years."
Oh.
And he told me that he was in the hospital. He was having some problems, and he was in the hospital, but we're together now. And I said, "Okay, that's it." There is something to this astrology. So that's part of my journey as an astrologer, and my consulting work as an astrologer has been since the 80s. And yet again, with astrology, to recognize that astrology can be ruled by thought.
Yes.
Our thought is like a chemist. Our thought is powerful, and it regulates astrological currents, even if we don't know what's going on in our horoscope at a particular time. As there's a saying, the key to every man is his thought. Sturdy and defying though he look, he has a helm which he obeys, which is the idea after which all his thoughts are classified. That's from Emerson. And it's perfect because every moment our astrology is always in action. And we don't always have to know what our progressions or our transits are. And if we do, that's useful. Yet, if we are not always aware what's going on in our personal astrology, we can still be regulating it by our consciousness, by our awareness. So that's my little response to what you're saying. I know it wasn't just one or two words. It was
it's beautiful.
Drawn out.
Anyway. So you taught me when I first met you, you taught me a little practice that kind of helps to balance the energy. So I guess my last question would be, what is a tangible way that I'm suspecting you use, but that you know of that will help people to get more in alignment? Let's say that they are able to sense that there's a stuckness there, right? Like, it's not the right word, but it's a word that we recognize. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a stuck kind of energy. Is there something that you can share with the listeners that kind of helps them to know, okay, so when I feel that way, I can do this, or I can change my thoughts, or what is it how can we manipulate that energy to then allow it to flow again?
Awareness. I always say awareness. Being more aware of what's going on in our world will give us the power to look at what we call being stuck and ask ourselves a question. What if I was unstuck? And then allow that question to flow. And I'm going to use time references now, to flow out of us like ripples in a pond when you throw a pebble into it. I'm basically paraphrasing some of the work of Dr. Richard Bartlett, in his matrix energetics work, speaking about how when you drop down into your heart, which is an enormous field of light and energy, and you ask yourself the question, Is it possible for me to be unstuck? Or what if, how would I feel if I were unstuck? And then allow that thought to go into the pond and ripple out into space, and then forget all about it, and then see what happens, because there's going to be a return current to that. So in a way, what we're doing is we are asking an open-ended question, and then we are allowing another possibility to show up in our experience. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we should just treat it as, or treat it like that. I mean, there could be issues that a person has. The person may have a history of diabetes or a history of high blood pressure. They would have to be highly aware and accept and believe in this open-ended question that we're talking about to have a different effect. If they know that their doctor, if they believe that their doctor, their physician is going to help them, then by all means, see your physician. If this unstuckness is something that's a physical problem that you're experiencing, because you may have a history of this. And history, again, they're all memories. It's all data playing in our subconscious. This data is information, and it can be changed in the blinking of an eye. And yet, at the same time, people must be practical. And, well, there's another, practical may not be the best word, because life itself is the most practical thing there is. If we didn't have life, we wouldn't be talking. We wouldn't be having this conversation. So practicality, life is the most practical thing there is. So the action of life is the most practical. So in answer to your question, ask yourself an open-ended one. How would I feel if I was unstuck? And then move through that experience of being unstuck, and notice what's different and not the same. That can be very useful.
Yeah.
And don't look for the feeling of being stuck, because we tend to look for the problems that we just got rid of, because why? Habit.
Yeah.
Habit of the cable. We weave a thread of it every moment, and alas, we're not always able to break it. So changing our habits of thinking, changing our habits of thought, changing our habits of feeling. This is an act of desire, which becomes aspiration, which becomes the will of God within us to recreate and reposition ourselves in our relationship to the universe. And this is what astrology is all about, is understanding your position in space, and recognizing that even the astrology itself, as it shows up in your horoscope, that's not it. That's just, that's also another limitation, depending on how you look at it. And yet it's a useful one, because it's a doorway. You go through the door, and then you recognize, okay, this was a portal, because it allowed me to put my attention on the celestial frequencies. And so we can move through life with the stars, because the stars are accomplished light emanators. And their consciousness is ever available every single moment of every single day. And we're going to be getting a lot more of that from the sun, because we're in a sunspot cycle, the 25th sunspot cycle. And the astronomers said that this cycle was going to come into fruition in 2025. Yet this sunspot cycle is actually becoming more intense. So it may come to a height a lot sooner. Now, what are sunspots? Sunspots are emanations from the sun, which reach our planet, and they seem to correspond to grids of our electrical grids that tend to be blown out because the energy is just too powerful. But also the sun, you could also look at the sun as sending forth consciousness information that's useful. And because the sun is a being of living consciousness, and it has a personality, it has an identity, and it has evolved over eons of time to become a sun. And so what we see as a sun is an actual living entity, which is conscious, knows everything about us, knows everything about every planet and every part of the solar system. And it has its own guru. and that guru has its guru. And there are families of stars in our constellation, in our galaxies, which are all conscious beings. So we're going to experience a lot more energy and more intensity over the next year. So be aware of that, and just recognize it is an opportunity for us to go up higher. And whatever knowledge you have, whatever you know as a modality, as a method to heal, to raise your consciousness, use it, and don't get stuck in the methods.
Yeah.
Use it and become it. Become the best that you can be in whatever field that you're in.
Awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical and Infamous podcast with the Happy Lyon Center. Send requests for topic discussions, questions, and comments to podcast@happylyoncenter.com. That's podcast@happylyoncenter.com.